Well, our topic this evening, as my introduction, is one that is very near and dear to my heart. It plays into my personal experience very, very intimately. But I want to set the topic up by reminding you where you live. Everyone in this room, I think everybody in this room, is a Bible worker. Well, you happen to live right here in what is regarded to be the most secular state in the nation. Oregon is the second most secular state in the nation. These two states are those in which the larger proportion of the population make no religious profession whatsoever. Now, that's the world I come from. That's the mindset that I come from. I was raised in a completely secular home in Southern California. I was born into drug addiction. I knew absolutely nothing whatsoever about the Lord. The first time I encountered somebody who tried to share with me about God and began quoting from the Bible to persuade me, I said, is that like Shakespeare, or is that what the Bible is? It's that kind of literature? That's how far removed my world was. If God existed, nobody in my world knew it. I was baptized with my girlfriend, Sue, who's my wife now, in March of 1982. We were 18 years old. And long story short, to get to the point of this little testimony, I had been preaching the gospel for some 5 or 7 years when I had an encounter with my grandmother. I knew her. I had visited her home as a boy on a number of occasions. In fact, it was my grandmother's home to which our little family, my mom and us 4 children, escaped one 4th of July evening out of California into Arizona after my mom received her last very severe beating in that home and began to venture out to start a new life raising these 4 children by herself. But still, nowhere in the vicinity of our world was any notion whatsoever of God. I knew my grandmother. I had been preaching the gospel now after my baptism for some 5 or 7 years. And my grandmother said to me, she said, I'm not surprised. She said, this is all according to schedule. And I said, what are you talking about? And I discovered, my grandmother told me that when I was born, that she put her hands on me and she prayed, not just for me, not just that I would know the Lord, but very specifically, my grandmother told me that she laid claim to my body and my mind and asked God to make me a preacher of the gospel. My grandmother's telling me this these years afterwards. Now, there was this powerful, amazing facts evangelist. All of them are, by the way. They are Bible text machine guns, amazing facts evangelists. But there was one who stood out at this time above them all. He was renowned. He had a reputation. He could baptize anybody. His name was Dan Collins. He was a cowboy from Texas. And he was the one who began quoting the Bible to me in the home. And I asked him if that was like Shakespeare or something. What is that? Is that, what? This is the Bible, he told me. So he wanted me to believe in Jesus based on the fact of an authoritative text that to me was, because of my upbringing, of no significance whatsoever. It was on the same level as the Iliad or the phone book, something like that. It was literature. That's what it was. It was myth. It was just something, in the category of a college course. But it wasn't an authoritative word. He was so perplexed that I was impenetrable, and just time after time. He was the one who baptized my mother. And then he set his sights on me. Didn't work. After I was baptized, the local church members, not through his meetings, this was sometime later, but after I was baptized, some of the church members told me, "Do you remember Dan Collins?" I said, "Yes, of course I do." And they said, "We don't know if we should tell you this, but he told us, after visiting in your home a number of times, he told us, if I have ever met a lost soul, it's that Taj Gibson kid. And I don't expect that he will ever turn to the Lord." I said, "Really? He told you that? Thank you for not telling me that before my baptism." Okay. And then when I discovered about my grandmother's prayer, I was absolutely blown away. Prayer is powerful. There was a survey done on the streets of secular cities some time ago that was very revealing. In this survey, just 2 questions were asked. They would walk up to people on the street and say, we're just asking a couple of questions, tabulating some information. Do you have any interest in religion or church or things of that nature? About 8 out of 10 people just said no. No interest whatsoever in religion or church. But then, right on the heels of that question, same individuals, do you have an interest in God? And the numbers flipped. 8 out of 10 people approximately said, well, yeah. Church? Religion? No. God? Yeah, I'm curious about God. I have an interest in God. I read a bumper sticker not too long ago that said people are leaving church every day and returning to God. I thought, that's a mindset. That's an attitude about church and religion, isn't it? That's very revealing, in fact. I live in Oregon now. It's a very secular state. And I just recently saw another bumper sticker that was revealing of this mindset. The bumper sticker said, Jesus called the other day, said he wants his religion back. So here is the understanding that Christianity has somehow been hijacked for purposes that are contrary to the person of Jesus Christ. There's this widening gulf between those who believe in the institutional church and institutionalized religion and those who are claiming to be spiritual people and to have spiritual interest, having spiritual connections, but no connection with church or religion. Now, something's happening there, and we can attack it, and we can tear it down, and we can assess it negatively, or we can say, wait a minute here. The mind and heart of man presently is primed for a new revelation of God on a personal level. Now, I don't believe that Seventh-day Adventism is first, foremost, or primarily a church. I know church leaders who don't believe that it's a church, who would much rather describe it as a movement of a revolutionary sort, and that the organizational structure and machinery is seen as a conduit, as a channel through which to advance the revolution. So the organizational structure is secondary to the mission. So what is it that we're called to as a people, and what is it that you're called to and I'm called to living in this very secular part of our nation. You're going to encounter people as Bible workers like the guy I encountered on a flight out of Denver. I took my seat and I did exactly what I always do. I opened a book and I began to read. And as I was reading, you know that feeling where you know the person sitting next to you is kind of glancing over to see what you're reading. I knew so I just turned it so he could read it. Just turned it a little bit. He kind of chuckled and elbowed me a little bit, you know, laughing that I had caught him. We were friends immediately. He said, so I see that's about religion. That's about, you're reading something about God, and what do you do? And so I told him, I teach, and the Bible is the textbook that I use in teaching. That was just a very simple way of describing I didn't want to say, you know, I preach the gospel, would you like to hear it, or anything like that. I just said I teach, and the Bible is the primary text. And he said, just rather matter-of-factly, off the cuff, he said, well, I'm an atheist. I said, really? I said, so am I. He said, you teach and you use the Bible and you're reading a religious book. You're not an atheist. You're playing with my mind. No, I said, I am an atheist. He paused again. He said, so why are you teaching the Bible then? I said, well, let me just ask you to do me a favor. I mean, we have this flight now and we have some time. Would you be willing to describe to me the God you don't believe in? He said, you are playing with my mind. He was a nice guy, though. We could play like this. I knew there wouldn't be any offense. And he paused, and I could tell he was thinking. I just continued reading. And he said, the God I don't believe in. He said, okay, I'll take a stab at it. And he began to describe a God who will torture people in hell forever and ever with a tone of just amazement. How could anybody believe such a thing? Kind of amazement. Torture people forever and ever. Okay? That's the God I don't believe in. And then he said, and what about this idea? What about this ridiculous idea that God's like this CEO in the sky, this head honcho kind of sovereign God who micromanages everything from the little kid that just died of starvation to the car accident that just happened over here too. And he just described all these atrocities on planet Earth, and God's just sovereign over this, just controlling everything, and this sovereignty idea. You know, they say that not only does he micromanage and control every single thing that happens, but this God, because he's in control of everything, actually he decides, he pre-decides, he predestines who's going to hell and who's going to heaven. It's all decided before any of us are born. This God has already predestined some people to be tortured forever. I said, is that all? And he said, well, just look at the world. Just look at the world. People dying of starvation just for want of food to eat. Rape, murder, child abuse. Oh, there was a tone in his voice. Child abuse? And there's this God who's presiding over all this? That's the God I don't believe in, he said. I said, I don't believe in that God either. He said, but you believe something, don't you? I said, I don't believe that any such God as you just described exists anywhere in the universe. And that the God you just described that you don't believe in more resembles the devil. He said, well, so you don't believe that? I said, no, I don't believe any of that stuff that you just described. None of it. No such God as any, no way. Oh, and I was just resonating with him. He was just like, yes. We were just a couple of atheists just sitting there, just basking in our atheism. And he just had a friend in his unbelief. And I said, well, but can I ask you a question now? Let me just one more. Just one more question. I said, I'm not saying it's true, and I'm not trying to convince you, but I just want to ask you, if it were possible, not that it's true, but possible, if it were possible that a God could exist that's nothing like the God you just described, but in fact totally opposite, would you want him to exist? I mean, I'm not saying he does, but I'm just asking, what if a God could exist who was a God, let's say, of perfect, unswerving justice and righteousness and integrity? In other words, he always does the right thing for the other guy. Always, without exception. And what if that God of justice, who always does the right thing for the other guy, what if that God were a God who actually loves every single person in the world, regardless of their religion or their culture or their race or their upbringing, but just loves everybody, just indiscriminately, just extravagantly? What if he just loved everybody without partiality? Would you want that God to exist? I mean, how are you going to answer that? He said, well, you know, I'd be kind of stupid not to, I mean, we're not saying he does, right? I said, no. But it'd be kind of dumb to have this possibility of a totally good, righteous, wonderful God, and then to say, I don't want him to exist, right? That'd be dumb. I said, yeah, that'd be stupid. Yeah, that'd be totally dumb. I mean, we're not saying he does, but you'd want him to, wouldn't you, if he could exist? I mean, if you could have a God like that, wouldn't you want to? Oh, yeah, he said, yeah, I guess, sure. I said, so you're not really an atheist. You're like more of an agnostic, because you're not really sure. But I said, wait a minute. I said, you said that if that God could exist, you'd actually want him to. That's like desire. That's like yearning. That's like longing. That's like wishing. So I don't even think you're an agnostic. I kind of think you are searching, and that the God you don't believe in is just a massive obstacle in your way. And I'd like to suggest that you could just remove that image, that idol, that falsehood. You could just push the eject button on it. Just say, that's not true. He said, you're not an atheist, are you? I said, listen, I'll tell you what I am. I am as close to an atheist as you can get and still believe in God. He said, what do you mean? I said, because almost everything that is popularly believed to be true about God, I don't believe is true. I don't believe that God eternally torments people. I don't believe that he, in eternity past, in some kind of timeless, eternal now, decided before all of us were born who would go to that eternally burning hell and who would be saved. Just unilaterally, with absolutely no choice involved and no reciprocation, no response, no opportunity, nothing. Just I will decide for my glory who's going to suffer and who's going to have paradise. I don't believe that. And we just went through the list. But the one that's most significant, especially for the kind of mindset that you will increasingly encounter, where his voice began to become tense, where there was an undercurrent of emotional was this question of, come on, you can't possibly think that a God could exist and have a world like this on his hands. I mean, what kind of psychopath would he have to be? What kind of sadistic monster would actually have the power to intervene and feed children and watch them starve? What kind of God would have the power to stop child abuse and not stop it? I mean, really, you're standing on the edge of a body of water and you're a good swimmer, and somebody's in the process of drowning. And you choose not to use the power at your disposal, that is, your ability to swim well. You choose not to jump in and save them. What kind of person are you? This is, without question, the biggest intellectual and emotional hurdle that human beings have to deal with. Now, if you deal with people who are already Christians, and that's most of your fellowship circle, you'll find a lot of answers to the question, some of them trivial, some of them just kind of off-putting, some of them quite aggravating. You will find neat packaged little answers about suffering, most of it tending in the direction of, well, it's somehow for our good and God knows what's best, and so that's why your daughter just drowned. It's to build your character or save Aunt Millie or something. We don't know exactly what God is up to, but we know that somehow he orchestrated this for some purpose that we'll never understand. Now, a lot of people find that comforting. The world I grew up in, it's very difficult to find that comforting. Most of the people who find that comforting are people who were raised within some kind of religious setting, but people who are raised in the immediate vicinity of concrete evil, where blood is flowing and there are screams in the night, find it very difficult to process that kind of answer. Very difficult. So what is it that we're talking about here? The theologians like to call it theodicy. Theodicy is from two Greek words, theos, which is what? God, of course, and then daike, which is justice. And theodicy is that branch of theology, that branch of the study of God and things related to God. Theodicy is that branch of theology that addresses the question of God's goodness and justice and love in the face of evil. Those two things are somehow held in tension, and there has to be an answer. There has to be an answer in order for the human mind to find a resting place in worshiping God voluntarily, spontaneously, and with adoration. Now, you can be raised all your life feeling intellectually and behaviorally captive and bound to God and to whatever your upbringing in religion happens to be. But your emotional person will find it difficult to kick in and to experience spontaneous love and adoration for God until some semblance of a love-based character in God is brought to your mind and it's convincing to you. That's where most people are. That's where I was. When Dan Collins was quoting Bible verses to me, he didn't understand that I was in an emotional place that he wasn't touching. authority, that is the authority of a book that he regarded as authoritative, quoted to me with his very powerful personality, wasn't enough. I said, I don't believe that. He said, how could you not believe that? It's in the Bible. I said, well, what's the Bible? So these are the kinds of people that you're most likely to encounter in this part of the world. What is theodicy? Well, in your outline, I don't know if you're open to paradigm shift, which is outline number 1, you'll notice 2 Bible verses on page 1 of your outline, and this really puts the problem out there for us. This is the problem. Let's ask ourselves this question. What are we asking people to believe? All right? Okay, 1 John 4:8, we all know it. God is what? God is love. That is, by the way, the absolute, without question, bar none, most powerful statement that can be made by human lips. That one sentence has more explanatory power than our entire evangelistic series and the entire doctrinal package. And in fact, as we're going to learn in our time together, our entire doctrinal package only makes emotional sense in the context of this declaration. The Bible, for example, never says God is justice. Only that God is just. Never does the Bible say God is mercy, but that he is merciful. Never that God is gentleness itself, but that God is gentle. Never that God is kindness, but kind. This is the only total identity statement made about God in Scripture. Unless you think in your mind, well, isn't God all those other things too? Well, yes. Yes, God is just and merciful and kind and gentle and righteous. Because all of those attributes and character traits are aspects of and expressions of love, of God's love. God is love in totality. That is the complete, essential core of God's identity. And everything else that is true about God is true about God because God is love. God is just because God is love. It's a false dichotomy that is popular in Christianity as a whole to place love and justice as 2 separate attributes of God. God is love, people will say, but he's also just. No. God is love, therefore God is just. Doing what is right and just is the loving thing to do. Doing what is merciful is the loving thing to do, and only God, in his full-orbed identity of love, has the perfect balance of knowing when and how much and to what degree to apply justice and mercy in perfect balance in every situation. God is love. But then notice, and this is just a sampling of all the many texts that speak of God's power. Revelation 1 and verse 8. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord, who is and was and is to come. Notice, the what? The Almighty. Okay, so this is the tension. We've got on the one hand this idea that God is love. God is intrinsically good and righteous and just and perfect in every way. And God is all-powerful. And then we have this world, which raises the question in anybody's mind who's thinking about it, and especially in the minds of those who have experienced concrete evil and suffering. It immediately raises the question, well, if God is all-powerful and if God is all good, all loving, well, why doesn't he use his power to somehow stop, prevent, intervene, call it what you want, to do something to make sure that bad things don't happen to people? Why doesn't he? So either God is all-powerful, but he's not good, in which case, could you worship him? I don't mean in an obligatory, slavish sense. Of course, you would be scared out of your noggin not to worship him if you believed that the universe was governed by an almighty, omnipotent being of a malevolent character. Yeah, you'd bow. So would I. But I'm not asking whether you would do the posture with your body. I'm asking, would the posture arise in your heart to love him, to actually care about him, to feel positive toward, to actually feel affection or fondness of him. No, you'd bow, but you wouldn't like him. So almighty power apart from goodness doesn't work. But what if God is all good, right? But he's not all powerful? Well, wait a minute. That creates an equal but opposite kind of tension. How could he possibly be God then? Is he like my grandpa? I mean, no power, but he's just a neat guy. He can't do anything, but I'm not sure about the worship thing anymore. I don't think I'd categorize a being like that as God. Would you? Well, this is the tension that people experience. Most people, I find, in Bible work and visitation and ministry, most people live in a place of either private pain or private perplexity on some level. And they just move stuff to the back burner, off to the side. They either pursue adventure, or they medicate, or they pursue one illicit relationship after another, all in an effort to just not deal with the fact that there is this deep reservoir of perplexity and pain because of the things that have been witnessed and seen. Theodicy, that is the question of how could God possibly be good with evil and suffering like we have in this world. Okay. Theodicy, listen, is the most naturally occurring branch of theology. Nobody ever naturally, spontaneously, apart from religious instruction, ever begins really to wonder about whether they should be baptized by immersion or by sprinkling. If you're raised in a home like I was raised in, that question would never occur to you. You wouldn't really care, actually, until some later time in your educational process. Okay? That doesn't naturally occur to you. Okay? But theodicy is a naturally occurring branch of theology in the sense that whether you're raised in a religious home or not, whether you have any religious instruction or not, you witness suffering, evil, either in close proximity, you either experience it or you know somebody. Sooner or later, everybody begins to feel pain. And that is, as soon as somebody comes along, either in passing or knocking on your door, or the Bible worker comes, as soon as somebody suggests the idea of God, it's in that context. Whether you and I see that context or not, whether they see that context on the intellectual plane or not, on the emotional plane, everybody is living under the weight of the picture they hold. Whether it's intellectually thought out carefully. The guy on the airplane, he told me he hadn't ever articulated the God he didn't believe in. He just knew he didn't believe it. But when he articulated it, and somebody resonated with him and said, that is a diabolical idea, isn't it? All of a sudden he realized that his unbelief was justified. And this is historically how basically modern atheism came into existence. Have you read Great Controversy recently? You should have gotten one in the mail. Did you? Yeah. Praise God. North Pacific Union and Light Bearers Ministry got together and produced a whole new great controversy with New King James text to make it easier to read. Everything she wrote is the same, but New King James Version text all put in there instead of the King James these and thous and shouldas and couldas and the Shakespeare thing. And you should have gotten one of those in the mail as a free gift, and you should be reading it. And you should go to the chapter, The French Revolution. And you will discover that modern atheism was birthed into existence as a violent emotional reaction against the picture of God that the guy on the plane couldn't believe. In other words, modern atheism didn't come into existence as a scientific venture. It wasn't people sitting in a room doing dissection and looking through a microscope, and the theory of evolution didn't come till 150 years later. The French Revolution that gave birth to atheism was what is called protest atheism, not scientific atheism. Protest atheism. In other words, if God's like that, I don't believe in him. And so the prevailing 1,260 years of papal dominance that basically was a process of uglifying the character of God in the minds and hearts of people with a doctrinal system that caused human beings finally to rise up in their God-given liberty and say, if God's like that, I don't believe in God. That's how atheism came into existence. Let me just tell you a secret now that we're going to explore in greater detail tomorrow. Do you know that in the book of Revelation, the historical trajectory has the beast from the bottomless pit, which in the historicist interpretation of Bible prophecy is the French Revolution and the birth of modern atheism in violent reaction against Catholicism. Okay? Catholicism rules for 1,260 years. The French Revolution occurs and reacts to that picture of God. You know what happens next in the prophetic line? The Advent movement is born as the response, as the answer to that world that is now in the throes of reorienting itself to the character of God. And that's why the prophet that God gave this church came along and over and over and over again, as we're going to learn tomorrow, said that the entire package of truth that God has given us as a people is actually so many different windows looking in on the character of God to vindicate him before the world and the universe. In other words, the Adventist doctrinal system is a series of windows that collectively compose the most beautiful picture of God the world has ever seen since Jesus himself in the flesh lived in this world. That doctrinal system, she says, is a perfect chain of truth. Not a series, these are her words, not mine, not a series of detached items anchored nowhere. It is a mosaic. It is a collage of images that collectively come together to magnify the beauty of God's character in a way that the world has never really seen on a full-scale, worldwide, revolutionary level. So Revelation 18 comes along and says that that Advent movement that was born back in chapters 10 and 11, then in chapter 14, gains momentum. And as it gains momentum, the language that is used in the spirit of prophecy is that it swells to a loud cry until Revelation 18:1 says the whole earth was illuminated with his glory. In other words, it swells to a worldwide, global revelation of the character of God in the historical context of the movement that defamed the character of God, the movement that reacted to it, and now the movement that has been called by God to vindicate the character of God with a whole different perspective that we'll be exploring tomorrow. The point this evening is this. that every single person that you're going to encounter in Bible work holds some kind of either intellectual or emotional picture of God themselves in reality on some level. Most people haven't sat down, written it out, or thought it through, but everybody lives under the weight of a paradigm, a basic worldview. There are 6.8 billion people on the planet. And get this, there are only basically 4 worldviews. 6.8 billion people, and everybody on the planet believes one of 4 things, basically. There's all kinds of different form and packaging and ceremony on the surface. But at root level, the first worldview that it's listed here, not first in importance, not first in numbers, there are approximately 800 million professed atheists in the world today. It's approaching the billion mark, where you have the big billions. That is 1 billion Catholics in the world. These are approximate numbers, you understand. 1 billion Catholics, 1 billion Muslims, 1 billion Protestants, 500 million Buddhists. That right off the bat, and then 1 billion Hindus. So right off the bat, we've just, 5 billion people on the planet believe something about God. Right? And then there's the 6th billion, approaching 6 billion, and that is material atheism. Not materialism like I really like to go to Nordstrom's, but materialism in the sense that all there is matter. There's no spiritual dimension, there's no moral dimension to life, there's no God, there's no angels. We're biological survival machines. And the reason why we're so vicious, and the reason why they're suffering, is because it's a natural process. Survival of the fittest. Move, follow, or get out of the way. It's all about me. Why haven't you caught on? The evolutionary worldview basically says that human beings are survival machines. That's it. Pure biology. That's all. So why is there suffering in the world? Well, just because there is. There's no moral dimension to it. Get over it. Quit whining. If you need religion, go ahead and get a little religion if that'll comfort you. But face the hard reality when you're ready, that we're alone in the cosmos and there's nothing. You're going to die and become compost. There is no spiritual dimension, and therefore there is no moral gravity to any act. Not child abuse, not rape, not murder, not war. All of its natural process, may the best man win. And the faster we understand that, the faster we will evolve as a race. Which, by the way, I won't be talking about this in particular, maybe a little bit tomorrow morning. By the way, if you try to marry that worldview with God in what is called theistic evolution, I believe in God, but I also believe in the evolutionary process, and that's how we came into existence. Oh my. Can you imagine the kind of God who would have initiated the process, the brutal, bloody, kick, scratch, claw, bite process of evolution? They are completely incompatible worldviews, if for no other reason, because the character of God would be so absolutely horrible that nobody could worship him. We would have to be his enemies just to maintain integrity. Okay, so the second worldview that people hold is pantheism. I divided it with a hyphen there in order to make the point. Pan, the cameraman says, the director says to the cameraman, pan left. What does he mean? Pan right. What is Pan American Airlines? I don't think it exists anymore. What is a pandemic? What is pan? Pan just means everywhere, universal. Okay, what is theism? That's God. So what is pantheism? Well, everything is God, or God is everything. The chair, the rock, the tree, the mountain. There is no personal God. Pantheism is basically religious atheism, because there is no personal being kind of God. God is just like the cosmic whole of everything that is. That sounds so like mystical and, whoa. We just all kind of blend with the cosmos, are we? Doesn't feel right to me. I don't want to blend with nothingness. That's not any better than becoming compost. Okay, that's pantheism. How does it deal with suffering and evil in the world? I'm trying to shorten this. How does it deal? Well, suffering is necessary for the evolution of life. Again, it's an evolutionary view, but it takes in a kind of quasi-spiritual dimension and says there's a reincarnation process in some branches of pantheism where the individual continually circulates into higher and higher planes of existence until nirvana, not the rock group, the state of mind, is attained. And that's when you don't feel anything anymore. Nirvana is a completely passive state where you don't ever empathize or sympathize with suffering anymore. You don't feel anything anymore. And that's how you deal with suffering, by detachment. Nirvana is sometimes called detachment. Okay, that's how suffering is dealt with in that world. Then there's a third worldview. It's very prominent. Every one of us have been impacted by it. Almost everybody in this room believes it, to one degree or another. And that's deterministic theism. That is the existence of a God who is primarily all about power and control and sovereignty. And he micromanages the universe and the world in your life. And every single thing that happens is by the will of God. We'll try to explore that more. And right when I said that, almost everybody in this room, including myself, said, well, isn't that kind of true? Tell the truth. Raise your hand if you're kind of feeling a little nervous about what I just said, like, I think I might believe that. But what I want to share with you is you're not, if you're a Seventh-day Adventist, you're not a Calvinist. You do not believe, you know what you're supposed to believe? Okay, there's a fourth worldview. There's a fourth worldview, and it is truly revolutionary, and it is sometimes called benevolent theism, not deterministic theism, but benevolent theism. Sometimes it's called warfare theism, and in Adventist circles it's called the Great Controversy theme. And that worldview sees that God is not primarily about power, but what is primary with God? Love. God is love. And because love is the core essence of who God is, out of that love, out of the womb of that love, a world was brought into existence with free moral agents. Why? So they could have the capacity to love like God loves. So the capacity for love is directly linked to freedom. But with freedom, there is the risk that those who are free to love might choose not to love. And now all of a sudden, you can see how a God of almighty power, but a God whose love is primary, could have a world like this on his hands and actually not like it and want to bring it to an end and look forward to spending eternity with you and me free from all suffering and pain, that he didn't orchestrate it, that a rebellion has occurred. There's a revolt in God's universe. Something's gone wrong, and it's actually wrong. You can look into the eyes of that mother that lost her baby and say, that was horrible what that man did to your baby. And God didn't like it either. And his heart resonates with you. And all of a sudden, you can unite with people in their pain on an emotional level, and you can defy the darkness with them. And God is vindicated in their eyes. And the floodgate of emotion opens up. And rather than just worshiping God out of a sense of raw duty or obligation, in the benevolent theism worldview, in which God is love, therefore God created a world for love, therefore God created a world free, therefore God has a great controversy in his hands that he is in the process of overcoming, and eternity is free from pain in God's universe. You can actually see in people's eyes the moment it registers. If people get it, if it registers, what? Really? All of a sudden, the heart opens up. And the individual wants to know about that kind of God in on a level that maybe they've never wanted to know before. So we're going to be exploring some things related to that theme. And tonight was just a primer to prepare us to be Bible workers and communicators, not of merely a list of detached items, but communicators of the beauty of God's character in such a way that people will not only be intellectually convinced, but emotionally drawn to the Lord.